to the Canadian Principal Learning Network podcast. This is the third episode in our newest series of podcasts from the 2016 Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences. On today's episode, you'll hear my interview with Dr. Jerome Cranston, Executive Director of Student Engagement and Success and Associate Professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba. Dr. Cranston discusses the lack of transition plans and resources for Indigenous students transitioning from high school to university as well into graduate studies. Additionally, Dr. Cranston explores how a leader can stay motivated in their position when it seems like there are so many problems in our world and not enough solutions. Thank you for listening to the Canadian Principal Learning Podcast. My name is Kristin Schmidt, and this is a collaboration with the University of Ottawa, supervised by Dr. Stephanie Chitpin. Thanks, and enjoy.
You have to connect. You have to connect with people and provide a hope and an optimism that there's always a possibility for us to get better, for us to improve, for us to reconcile broken relationships. And I'm someone who's committed to that. So I'm Jerome Cranston. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba. Disciplinary admin and leadership. I'm also the executive director of student academic success at the University of Manitoba. So that's an administrative position where my responsibility is something called University 1, which is 5,000 students in their first year. We also have an academic learning center, and I supervise the staff. We have a program called Arts 1110, which is Intro to University. I supervise that. And then the first year advising center.
Thanks. Okay, first question. It's an if question.
Okay.
If you had a monetary grant to effect positive change in education, what would you fund?
I think, given where I am physically located at the University of Manitoba, which is Treaty 1 territory, I see no more important endeavor that we ought to be committed to, which is to improve Indigenous success, not just in the K-12 system, but transition from K-12 even to post-secondary. And so I think that, a monetary amount that built bridges and networks, that really was grounded in the kinds of programs and services that Indigenous scholars need as they transition to university. It was a big enough monetary grant, also supporting our colleagues who work in First Nations schools. I think there's nothing more pressing for Canadians and for us to put our heads around trying to work in partnership with our Indigenous colleagues to try to see if we can make small steps forward.
I really agree with that. I went to the Margaret Atwood talk yesterday about compassion, and I was thinking one of the things that bothers me, like recent news about Attawapiskat and things like that, is the lack of compassion that I see in the news, things like that. So hearing you talk like that gives me hope that maybe there's someone else out there who also feels that compassion, that maybe we can do something.
There are a lot of people who I think are having their eyes opened wider with issues at Attawapiskat. We've had our issues in northern Manitoba. The tragedies and sadness caused by young people who have lost all sense of hope, making the choice to end their lives, northern Saskatchewan. Somehow we can do better as Canadians. Mm-hmm. We can do better. I think that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission findings, the call to actions, they demand a lot, and they ought to demand a lot from the rest of us in terms of what really is a negotiated deal that we haven't lived up to. As the colonial settler population on First Peoples lands, we haven't lived up to our terms of the treaty agreements, and it's darn time. I actually think our Indigenous colleagues, I call them our cousins, I think they've been patient enough and waited long enough. And the notion that they're calls to actions, yeah. And I think we have to change some things. I think we fundamentally have to change some things that we do in the education system. And we have a very colonial education system. We've created a system that leads to great success, but at the same time really makes people fit into a structure.
We sure do.
You know,
It's interesting to read the education acts of the various provinces and how there's Indigenous people are still referred to as Indians in Alberta, in Ontario, in most of the provinces. Yeah. In BC, they refer to them as Indigenous people or First Nations.
Yes.
And then, of course, in the territories, they're Indigenous people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just interested to see even the terminology. It could be easily changed.
Oh, absolutely. So it easily could be changed, yet at the same time, it needs a whole scale change. So I agree with you. As long as we have something in federal legislation referred to as the Indian Act, there actually is a danger with changing the legislation at the provincial level, because the ways that laws, but in particular laws in education role, the Canadian Constitution and the Charter are the most supreme and paramount federal legislation. Well, if that still has as a section the Indian Act, then if we change provincial legislations, we disconnect from the federal obligations. And so that's part of the problem. So I agree with you.
That's
We could do it, and we ought to do it. It has to be in concert with the federal government, and it has to be in keeping with the treaty arrangements that were actually made between our First Peoples, our Indigenous peoples, and the Crown. So, yeah, legislatively, it's simplistic. We just all have to get on board and do it in a way that actually honors the actual treaty arrangements that we made. So, yeah.
Interesting. All right, I'll move on.
Sure, but it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I could talk for a while on that, just exploring the issues. So what do you think will be the most important developments in educational leadership, research, and practice in the next 5 years?
So I spend a lot of time working with vice principals, people who are in central office administration in terms of my teaching and my scholarship. I think there's a growing disconnect between some really good conceptual and theoretically dense material that universities are producing and the lived reality of people in schools. I think that there has been a disconnect, and I think the disconnect is growing. I think the number of people who are scholars in ed admin and ed leadership who have never actually sat in a vice principal's chair or principal's chair or in the superintendent's chair and really come to understand the felt dynamic of making decisions is a real loss. I think we're suffering a real loss in ed admin leadership scholarship with people who really do understand how hard teachers, vice principals, people in central office, people in ministries of ed actually work. And I think over the next 5 years, we have to work harder. We have to work harder on our partnerships with people who are on the ground in schools. In some ways, it's not dissimilar to the previous answer I told you, where I actually think that we've got to connect with people who are on the ground. I mean, what are the issues, the challenges that they're seeing, that they're facing, and allow that to direct the research we do, as opposed to university researchers thinking that we know what the problems are, so therefore we set about on our agenda of research trying to solve problems, challenges, and issues that in our minds are big. But then when you talk to people in schools, sometimes they say that's really not our biggest issue.
It's like the principles of backwards design in a way.
Very much so, and I think we need more of that. I actually think we need much more community-based research, and it doesn't. It can be actual research. It can be quantitative. It can be qualitative. I mean, it can be deeply theoretically, strong, grounded in all the epistemology and ontology that's required for higher level kind of research. But it has to have meaning to the people who do this work. The people who actually show up every day and try to make a difference in the life of a child. And I am concerned, that if we don't make some fundamental shifts in the way that we approach our work at universities, that gap is just going to keep increasing. And I think that would just make us redundant. Like, I look at people who are teachers, and I want people who are teachers and principals and vice principals to direct the kinds of things that they think I ought to be focused on. I actually don't think I have many answers or solutions to the problems that people in schools are facing. I think I can help them spend time researching, examining. I can challenge some of their thinking about it, but I'm not about to tell them how to do their business.
So essentially, you're the tool that they can use.
That's how I see myself. Essentially, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think my job is to serve them. My job is to help them zero and focus and to really focus hard on what those things are. Sometimes, so narrowly so that we can really put a spotlight on just one thing. But absolutely, that's how I've approached my work. My work is really meant to improve what people in schools do, but not direct them.
Mm-hmm.
I need to take my cue from them.
This is the Canadian Principal Learning Network podcast. You're listening to my discussion with Dr. Jerome Cranston. Up next, Dr. Cranston talks about his leadership styles. Thanks for listening. Okay, so into your leadership style now.
Sure.
I'm wondering how you've evolved as a leader. Specifically, what's one of the biggest misunderstandings or mistakes that you experienced, and how did you react or cope to it?
So I'm someone who has, I'd like to say, a healthy self-regard. There might be people who would suggest it's overinflated ego. But most of my leadership has not been because I think I'm a particularly great leader.
Well, what makes a great leader then?
Well, I don't actually know. Like I get asked that question quite a bit. I'm a scholar of leadership. I think that you have to connect. You have to connect with people and provide a hope and an optimism that there's always a possibility for us to get better, for us to improve, for us to reconcile broken relationships. And I'm someone who's committed to that. And for some reason, I'm not surprised, but for some reason, people find that a leadership quality that they like to get behind. And so, I'm asked, I'm encouraged to take on leadership type roles, and I do. Like that's I have a good, healthy self-regard. I think that I can make a difference. I can make a difference. I can improve things. I'm not interested in being a leader, but I am interested in improving and repairing relationships, some of the things that happen in schools. And so I don't have a magic recipe. And I'm always surprised by the grad students that I spoke about earlier, who are a lot of school-based administrators who tell me, you're kind of my role model for leadership. I'm like, I don't understand that. Like, I just don't get it. And it's not playing down. It's just who I am. It's who I am, who I've been as a grown-up, less so as a young person. Taking responsibility for the fact that we are all on this planet together, and if we're going to improve the quality of lives of each other and children, everyone's got to roll up their sleeves and get busy trying to fix it. So, I don't really have a description for leadership, which is hilarious because quite often when I've gone to interviews, when I went for an interview as a principal, couple of times, people ask me, describe your leadership, and then I would have a very similar answer all the time that I don't actually think I can. I don't think I can describe what it is, and I don't think of myself as visionary either. So it's not like I've got some compelling vision. I think I'm just a really grounded person.
I think being a people person helps.
I think so. I think being a people person, and I think one of the things that who I am by both nature and nurture is I really do want to repair some of the brokenness that exists in our social world. I'm really concerned that people lose hope, that people don't think there's a chance for improvement, even if the improvement is small baby steps.
How do you keep yourself from losing hope when you get deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole?
I find inspiration in the small things. So I did a research project. It was actually a series of mini video documentaries, and I went to one of the most impoverished places in the world, in Calcutta, India. And in particular, I went to this neighborhood called Sialda, and it's poverty like you've never seen before in your life. And I worked with an NGO that had put together a bare bones teacher training program for people who had barely finished grade 10 and dropped out of school, and they were giving them enough, just enough, understanding of pedagogy and good practices, so they could go work in the slums, in the brick fields, with the idea that let's not fool ourselves that we're going to suddenly revolutionize people's lives and completely eradicate poverty. But for one child, a dose of literacy, a dose of numeracy may make tomorrow slightly better than today. So, as these children grow up with really limited skills, they're less likely to get swindled. If they're asked to sign a contract and they have some basic level of literacy, most likely they can read the contract. They may not understand it all, but they're not going to be asked to sign something that they can't read. Give them basic numeracy, they should be able to add up their paychecks and not get ripped off. That inspires me. Something that small inspires me, because it makes sense to me that these big grandiose ideas that we're going to revolutionize things. We've been talking about those sorts of things for, if not decades, centuries. It's the small one step at a time. So those are the things. I have my days where I wish things would move at a slightly faster pace in terms of the improvements and the change, in particular with what we're seeing in First Nations schools. But you know what? I'm always inspired by when I see, and not just First Nations kids, when I see young people walk across a college, a trade college or a university stage, and everything that you know about that young person's history would suggest they shouldn't have made it, but they did. Those are the things. It's like, yeah, you know what? One small step at a time, and we'll make this a better place. We'll make this a better place for all of us.
Great. So I'm wondering if you could fill in the end of this sentence. My biggest barrier to success is...
I'll give you 2 words to end it. Time and distraction. I'm pretty good at splitting my time, not multitasking. I tend to be able to focus on one thing at a time, but people joke that I'm probably one of those people who can squeeze the most out of a 24-hour day. And then distraction. I tend to be able to focus, but because I'm someone who I do want to solve the problems of the world, I really do, and I see them coming in many, then sometimes I get distracted by them. So, and then, and if I think about it, and I think about it, and my care less attitude also probably hurts me. I'm someone who's been incredibly successful with my career, largely because people have trusted me. But I actually don't play politics very well. I think I'm politically astute. It's worked for me. I do speak my mind. I'm opinionated. Sometimes I ought to be less opinionated or be more patient, trying to understand other people. So probably I would have been more successful in my career if I had learned to be more patient, bide my time, be a little more politically astute. But that goes with my careless attitude. I could care less. I could care less. I've had a phenomenal career. I've had a chance to work with some great people, and so maybe I would be higher in the upper echelon of admin scholars if I wasn't quite who I am. But I'm incredibly happy with who I am, and so my career has not taken off like a rocket like some people's. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that.
So you've already achieved success.
I'm a happy person. I am so content. I'm content. There are still things I want to hopefully be able to do. Every day I wake up, I am so happy and so content for this work that I get to do, this opportunity to work in a post-secondary. But I always tell people, if my university or another university or college had no use for me, I could be so happy going back to the school system too. I'd have so much work to do to learn how to keep up with young, bright people who I think are really pushing the envelope and pushing the boundaries, so I don't fool myself that it would be an easy transition. I love being involved in education. I also think I could move into the not-for-profit sector. So, you know what I mean? I'm an incredibly content person. I have the most wonderful life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Thank you for listening to the Canadian Principal Learning Network podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or compliments, you can email us at cpln@cpln.info. Feel free to send us an email, and if you want me to pass along any specifics to Dr. Jerome Cranston, I would be happy to do so. You can also comment below. We would love to hear your thoughts. Dr. Cranston's work can be found at www.jeromecranston.ca. You can look in the notes for that. The intro and outro music is called Pangea by Kevin McLeod. The Canadian Principal Learning Network is hosted and produced by Kristin Schmidt. It is a collaboration with the Canadian Principal Learning Network and the University of Ottawa, supervised by Dr. Stephanie Chitpin. Special thanks to Dr. Jerome Cranston for his thoughtful interview.